How do we start to find the right company to even help walk us through the next thing? And is Vidette gonna help us do that? And the answer was no. So that's where we landed at the end of the summer, with the expectation that by September of 2021, we'd have a new CEO. And it is currently March of 2022. And I think it's gonna be important for us to even walk through that process, how we got there. It was important to me that if we're gonna go through the process of hiring a CEO and all the different steps that we're taking, and that this was consistent with the marketing and with the branding and consistent with telling the story of Epigen.
The concept of Epigen started after I sold a company that I owned for 14 years. I was looking back over my time, and I took 2 years off to write about my observations over my time in the consulting industry at the federal government. In that 2 years, I took time to write about what I wanted to do next. I formed Epigen with the principle of starting a company that would provide a stage in which people's voices could be heard. And I wanted to be deliberate with my intent to start a company and drive a company that way.
I wish we had thought about this last year when we did the actual board meeting, because I would love to have captured each step of the way, even our frustrations with some of the other companies and all of that. But I think that there's gonna be multiple things that come out of this, but I think what's incredibly valuable is that we have for ourselves the documentary of how we came to be, and we can look back and see that story along the way.
The name Epigen is based in epigenetics, and it's a technique in genetics to understand how outside factors affect the growth of RNA and how that affects genes and the growth and development of DNA. It's the way that I write applications, so my applications are self-learning. So I wanted to start a company in the federal government. I wanted to focus on emerging technologies. My passion has been artificial intelligence and machine learning since my first model development in 1994. Over time, it's now, the technology has caught up with the techniques that I used in development of that.
When I started working with Terry, when I met Terry, I was actually hanging out at WeWork. I had one small little office, and it was really just all my studio equipment in there. I was just trying to like make music and be away from people. While he took time off and he was writing and, really thinking through what was next for him, I was doing something similar. I mean, I'd started a podcast at the time. I was just trying to find a creative space.
I want to kind of describe the machines in my office, right? So I like to build computers from the ground up. I like showcase systems and showcase environments. This machine here is liquid cooled. So every component in here is cooled by distilled water. This machine runs some serious heavy duty kind of models or computation, and it gets really hot. And when it gets hot to a point, you can't cool it with fans anymore. And as I was developing that in WeWork, there was another gentleman in the building that came by one day and knocked on my door and asked what all of these machines were about. And that gentleman was Rashad Howard. And he and I got to striking up conversations and started talking to each other about what our goals were in life. And we were amazed about how aligned we were and how much we had in common.
It used to be when I was here by myself, especially late at night, I would walk these halls. I'd check out all the different office spaces. Actually, this is one of the offices I really wanted. And it's funny, when I saw the screen in Terry's office, I pictured having it up in there. Late at night though, there were, all sorts of bright colors, blinking lights, technology that it was clearly technology, but I had no idea what it was. And so I was like, the first time I see this guy, whoever this is, I gotta ask him about all of this. And so I happened to be walking by one day, saw him in the office and asked a question. One, I asked about the touch screen. And I was just like, where'd you get that screen? Because I'd envisioned for myself that in my next space, in my next office, in my next endeavor, I would have a big open space with like lights, cameras, studio, all this other stuff. And here with all the toys.
And not just the individual machines, but what we've built here is a grid network or a mesh network of machines. And when we combine all of our machines together, we put them on the same network. On top of that network, we run something called Kubernetes. And Kubernetes is a container management system. It makes it easier for us to deploy our code, where if you didn't have this type of infrastructure or didn't know how to use it, you would hire teams of engineers, 20, 30 engineers to run your network. Our network runs itself.
I do think I heard when you called and said, hey, can you come facilitate our board meeting? And I kind of was like, why? It's you and Terry. You do your thing. You run your own board meetings all the time. And you were like, no, this is a different conversation that we need someone to hold the space to walk us through, And then kind of just listening to you guys before I got here, you were really saying there's a difference between what we started off building and what I'm doing now, right? Like what my role is in it, how I envisioned it, as a CFO or CEO. I'm also having to do these very tactical things that I used to do. And as we think about our leadership for the next quarter or the next 6 months, we've either got to do some really strategic things as leaders of this organization to kind of step back into our roles differently, hold our roles differently, get our executive team to wrap around those roles differently, or maybe there's something else that's needed. And thinking back on it, kind of when I was mapping out, okay, how do we structure this conversation? The decision wasn't clear that what you guys were going to do is to say, actually, it's time to bring in a professional CEO.
So we leave the meeting. Terry's like, hey, I want a new person in here in 90 days.
Yeah.
And then we both look at you. We're like, so go do that.
And I said no.
First you said no. Then we kept asking. You kept saying, I've never done that. And I'm just like, we haven't done this either. I don't care. Right? I mean, that's when the hard part really began, because all of us, knowing nothing about what to do now, had to go about finding a search firm. First it was, do we find a search firm? Right. Or it was like, well, me and him could just get together and just we could put out a feeler on LinkedIn and we could just find someone. And it was like, okay, maybe that won't work. Like, how do people hire CEOs? Like, I remember literally Googling how to hire a CEO. And the first thing comes up, hire a search firm. And I'm like, oh. And so we went about doing the next hard thing, and that was, how do we start to find the right company to even help walk us through the next thing? And is Vidette gonna help us do that? And the answer was no. So that's where we landed. We should absolutely not hire someone who's too great of a leader. Yes. We should hire someone who's just less of a leader.
I'm going to do this.
Right.